I thought I was going to a barbecue. That was the entire sum of my understanding on that Saturday afternoon, that we were going to Daniel's cousin's backyard for hamburgers and potato salad and whatever warmth could be extracted from an early June afternoon in the suburbs. I had been looking forward to it. That is the part that still catches me sometimes, when I let myself think about it, that I had actually been looking forward to it, had thought about what to wear, had put on the green sundress Daniel said he liked, had even made a bowl of pasta salad to bring because I wanted to contribute, because I always wanted to contribute, because I had spent 3 years trying to earn a seat at a table that, as it turned out, had never been set for me at all. What actually happened was this. Daniel's mother looked at me standing beside the car with the pasta salad in my hands and said, without hesitation, without apology, without even the courtesy of a pause, "There's no room." And then she got into the passenger seat and closed the door and stared straight ahead through the windshield as if I had already ceased to exist. Nobody said a word. Not Daniel's brother, already settled in the back, not his sister-in-law, not their 2 children, who were old enough to understand that something had just happened, even if they couldn't name it. Not Daniel, standing at the driver's side door with his hand on the roof of the car, looking at the pavement with the particular quality of stillness that I had come to recognize as the thing he did instead of speaking. They drove away. I stood in the driveway with the pasta salad, and I watched the car disappear around the corner, and then I stood there a moment longer in the silence, and then I walked back inside and up the stairs, and I began, with great care and complete calm, to pack my bags. To understand what that moment meant, you need to understand what had come before it. Daniel and I had been together for 4 years, married for 2 of them. We lived in a second-floor apartment on a street with old oak trees, in a building that smelled pleasantly of wood polish and, on certain evenings, of whatever Mrs. Henriksen on the ground floor was cooking. Our apartment had high ceilings and wide windows, and a kitchen that got the morning light in a way that made everything feel hopeful. I had painted the front room a color called warm linen on a Sunday afternoon before we were even fully moved in, standing on a stepladder with the radio on, and Daniel had handed me the tray and said, "It looks perfect." And I had believed him. I believed a lot of things in those early years. I believed that we were building something solid. I believed that the difficulties with his mother were manageable, the kind of friction that comes with any new marriage, the kind that patience and time and good faith smooth out eventually. I believed that Daniel, who was thoughtful and kind in so many ways, who remembered the things I mentioned once in passing and brought me tea without being asked, and laughed at the jokes I made under my breath in crowded rooms, would eventually find a way to stand beside me when it mattered. His mother's name was Patricia. She was 61 years old, trim, impeccably put together in the manner of someone who has decided that appearance is a discipline, and she had opinions about everything, about how Daniel should be spending his money, about where we should live and what kind of apartment was appropriate, and whether the neighborhood was up to standard, about children and when we should have them, and whether I was ready, and whether, frankly, I was the right sort of person to be making that determination. She delivered these opinions in a tone of measured concern that was somehow harder to deflect than open criticism would have been. "I just worry," she would say, or "I only want what's best for both of you," or, her favorite, with a small sigh and a tilt of her head, "Daniel knows what I mean." And Daniel would nod, or change the subject, or touch my arm in a way that was meant to be reassuring, but which I had gradually come to understand was mostly for his own comfort rather than mine. He hated conflict. That was the thing I had told myself for 3 years, the thing I had used to explain away every silence and every deflection and every moment when he had simply declined to defend me. He hates conflict. As if that were a complete answer, as if it were an explanation rather than a choice. My name is Ellie. I am 32 years old. I grew up in a house where people said what they meant and meant what they said, where disagreements were conducted out loud and resolved with some degree of dignity, where my parents had argued with each other sometimes but had never, not once, allowed either of their children to be treated as an inconvenience by people who were supposed to love them. I had grown up, in other words, with a baseline for what decency looked like. And I had spent 3 years adjusting that baseline downward in increments so small that I had barely noticed it happening, until I was standing in a driveway in a green sundress, holding a bowl of pasta salad I had made with my own hands, watching a car full of my husband's family drive away without me, and telling myself that perhaps there had genuinely been no room. There had been room. There were 5 seats in that car and 4 people in Daniel's family, and I had been standing right there. Patricia had looked at me and made a decision, and she had made it out loud, and not one person in that car had said anything. That was the truth of it, stated simply. I had been excluded deliberately, in front of witnesses, by a woman who had been excluding me in quieter ways for years, and the man I had married had put the car in drive. I want to dwell for a moment on the walk back up the stairs to our apartment, because it matters. Because I have noticed that people tend to assume, when they hear this kind of story, that the packing of bags is an impulsive act, a hot, tearful reaction to being hurt. They picture someone sobbing while flinging clothes into a suitcase. That is not what happened. What happened was quieter and stranger, and in some ways more significant than that. I climbed the stairs with the bowl of pasta salad still in my hands. I set it in the refrigerator because I am, apparently, someone who does that. I washed my hands at the kitchen sink and stood there for a moment listening to the water run and watching the afternoon light move across the countertop. And I felt something happen inside me. Not an explosion, but the opposite of an explosion. A compression, a settling, a thing coming to rest. The thought that came with it was not, I am furious. The thought was quieter and more definitive than that. The thought was, I am done. I went upstairs. I took the large suitcase from the top shelf of the closet, and I set it open on the bed. I began with the practical things, the things I would need regardless of what came next. My work clothes, my toiletries, my laptop, the folder in the bedside drawer where I kept documents. I moved through the room with the methodical focus of someone dismantling something they built carefully and intend to take back apart with equal care. I took the photographs from the dresser, the one of me and my sister at a lake house 6 summers ago, the one of my parents at their anniversary dinner. I did not take the photographs of Daniel and me, not yet. I was not sure yet what those meant or what I intended them to mean. I packed for approximately 2 hours. I worked slowly because I wanted to be thorough, and because slowness felt correct, felt like the right register for what I was doing, which was not a dramatic gesture, but a considered act. When I was finished, I had 2 full suitcases and a canvas bag of items that mattered to me. I changed out of the green sundress and into jeans and a soft gray sweater because the sundress felt like the wrong thing to be wearing for this. I carried the suitcases to the front hallway and set them by the door. I did not write a note because I could not think of anything to write that would not either under-explain or over-explain, and because I thought that the suitcases by the door would communicate the essential information more clearly than any note I could compose. Then I called my sister. Her name is Rachel, and she is 3 years older than me, and she has always been the person I call when things become real. She answered on the second ring, which is typical of Rachel, who treats her phone as what it is, rather than as an obligation to be managed. "Hey," she said, "aren't you at the barbecue?" "No," I said. "I need to ask if I can come stay with you for a while." There was a brief pause, the kind that is not hesitation, but attention. "Are you all right?" "I think so. I'm not hurt. I packed. I need somewhere to be." "Come now," she said, without any additional questions. "I'll put the kettle on." I sat on the couch and waited. Through the window, I could see the oak trees on the street below, their leaves a very full, very certain green, the kind of green that early June produces before the heat sets in and edges things toward yellow. A delivery truck moved slowly down the block. 2 children on bicycles navigated around it with the exaggerated confidence of children who have been cycling for exactly long enough to feel competent. Life was happening at its usual pace. The only thing that had changed was that I had made a decision, and the decision was sitting by the door in 2 suitcases, and I was done. They came home at 7:15. I heard the key in the lock, and then the sound of the door opening, and then nothing. The particular silence of people who have walked into a room and found it different from how they left it and have not yet processed the difference. Daniel appeared in the doorway of the front room first. He was carrying a container of leftover potato salad, which struck me, even then, as an absurd detail. He looked at me. He looked at the suitcases. He looked back at me. His expression went through several phases in rapid succession: confusion, recognition, and then something that might have been alarm or might have been guilt, and which I did not particularly distinguish between, because at that point, they felt like the same thing to me. "Ellie," he said. Behind him, I could hear Patricia's voice in the hallway. She had apparently come back with them, which I had not anticipated, and which made the scene both more complicated and, in a way I couldn't quite explain, more clarifying. I heard her say something to Daniel's brother, and then her footsteps, and then she appeared in the doorway beside Daniel, and she looked at the suitcases, and for the first time in the 3 years I had known her, Patricia had nothing to say. "I've packed some things," I told Daniel. "I'm going to stay at Rachel's for a while." "Ellie, come on," he started. "I'm not asking for permission," I said. "I'm telling you where I'll be." I picked up my bag. I took the handle of the larger suitcase. I walked to the door, which meant walking past Patricia, who stepped back, just slightly, just enough, and I went down the stairs and out into the warm June evening, and I did not look back. Not because I was being dramatic, but because there was genuinely nothing left to see. Rachel lived 20 minutes away. When I arrived, she had tea ready, and she did not ask me to explain anything immediately, which is one of the reasons she is the person I call. We sat in her kitchen, which smelled of lemon and something she'd been baking, and I drank the tea, and eventually I told her what had happened. Not the whole history, not the 3 years of small exclusions and polite dismissals and conversations I had not been included in, and decisions that had been made about our life without my knowledge. Just the immediate thing: the car, the 5 seats, the 4 people, Patricia's voice, no room, and Daniel's silence. Rachel was quiet for a long moment after I finished. Then she said, "How long has this been going on?" And that was when I understood that what had happened in the driveway was not the beginning of the story. It was the point at which the story became impossible to ignore. In the days that followed, Daniel called. He texted. He sent a long message at 11:30 on Sunday night that I read twice and then set face down on Rachel's coffee table without responding to. Because the message, while not unkind, was essentially an explanation of why what had happened was complicated, and I had spent 3 years accommodating the complexity of his mother's feelings at the expense of my own, and I found that I had temporarily exhausted my capacity for that particular accommodation. Rachel was direct with me, in the way she has always been. "You need to figure out what you actually want," she told me on the second morning, while we were drinking coffee on her back porch in the pale, early light. "Not what you're willing to settle for, what you actually want." "I want an apology," I said. "From Patricia?" "From Daniel." She nodded slowly. "And what does the apology need to include?" That was the question I spent the next several days sitting with, because I knew by then that the thing I was asking for was not a simple, "I'm sorry for driving away without you." That would have been easy, and Daniel was capable of easy apologies. Gestures, flowers, the particular remorseful look he wore when he knew he had crossed a line. What I was asking for was something harder and more specific. I was asking him to tell me, clearly and without hedging, that he understood what had happened, that he understood his role in it, and that he was willing to do something genuinely different, not just in that moment, but as a pattern, as a practice. I was asking him to choose me, clearly, consciously, without the caveat of his mother's comfort. I did not know yet whether that was something he was capable of. I did not know yet whether he had ever genuinely understood what choosing me would require. And sitting in Rachel's kitchen, working through the accumulated evidence of 3 years of small surrenders, I began to confront a more unsettling question: whether his silence on that driveway had been a failure of courage or whether it had been an answer. On the third day, I called my friend Donna, who had known Daniel and me since before we were married and who had, over the years, made a series of gentle observations about Patricia that I had each time found a reason to dismiss. Donna picked up immediately and said, "I've been waiting for you to call." "You heard?" "Rachel told me you'd packed. I figured you'd get to me when you were ready." We talked for nearly 2 hours. Donna, who has an organized mind and no patience for euphemism, walked me through the specific incidents she had noticed over the years. The Christmas dinner, where Patricia had rearranged the seating so that Ellie ended up at the far end of the table while the family clustered at the other end. The birthday gathering, where Patricia had announced a family trip to the coast for just us, in front of Ellie, without any apparent awareness that this required explanation. The conversations Donna had overheard, where Patricia referred to Daniel's apartment as though Ellie's name were not also on the lease. Small things, individually dismissible things. Together, a pattern with a shape. "She has been doing this for 3 years, Donna said, consistently and methodically, and Daniel has been letting her. He doesn't think it's that serious. He doesn't think it's serious because he's never had to be the one being excluded," Donna said. "He goes to the barbecue, he gets the potato salad, he doesn't see the cost because he's not paying it." That night, I lay in Rachel's guest room looking at the ceiling and thought about cost. About what it costs over time to make yourself smaller, to revise your reasonable expectations downward, adjustment by adjustment, until the gap between what you need and what you are getting is so narrow that you can almost convince yourself it doesn't exist. I thought about the pasta salad I had made and carried to the driveway and then put in the refrigerator, and which was still, presumably, sitting in our refrigerator right now. And I felt something that was partly grief and partly rage and partly something colder and more clear-eyed than either. Daniel came to Rachel's on Thursday. She texted me when he was pulling up, which I appreciated, and I met him at the door before he could ring the bell because I did not want this conversation to happen in Rachel's space. We sat on the front steps in the late afternoon. The street was quiet. A neighbor's cat was making its way slowly and importantly across the lawn next door. Daniel looked like he had not been sleeping well, which I noticed and registered without it moving me the way it once would have. He had brought nothing. No flowers, no anything, which I decided was actually the right choice, because flowers would have felt like an attempt to shorten the conversation. He said, "I'm sorry." I waited. I should have said something. In the car. I should have. She said there wasn't room, and I should have told her to move over, or... I don't know, Ellie, He stopped. His hands were linked together on his knees, and he was looking at them. I froze. "You froze," I said. "It happened fast." "It happened in your driveway, Daniel. You were right there. She said there was no room, and there was room, and you drove away." He didn't say anything for a moment. "I know." "That's not the first time," I said. "That is not, by a long distance, the first time." "I know." "I need to ask you something," I said, and I kept my voice very level, very quiet, because I had found in the preceding days that my steadiest voice was the most honest one. "Do you understand what the pattern is? Not just Thursday, the whole pattern?" He looked up at me then, and I watched him start to say something that would have been a deflection. I could see it forming, the beginning of a sentence about his mother's anxiety, about her difficulty with change, about her deep attachment to him and how that made things complicated. And then I watched him stop. He looked at the street. He looked back at me. "She makes you feel like you don't belong in our life," he said, and I haven't stopped her. It was, I will grant him, the most honest thing he had said to me in a long time. It was not a complete answer. It did not touch the depth of what I needed him to understand. But it was honest, and it was his, and it was something. "That is the beginning," I said. "That's where we'd have to start if we're going to try to work through this." "What else?" "I need you to talk to her," I said, "not in the way you have been, the way where you gently smooth things over and everyone pretends the problem is resolved. I mean a real conversation, where you tell her directly that what happened on Thursday is not acceptable and that it is not a one-time incident and that things need to change." He went quiet. I could feel him calculating the cost of that conversation against the cost of the situation we were in, and I let him calculate. I did not rush him. He needed to arrive at the answer himself if he was going to arrive at it at all. "She's not going to take that well," he said. "I know. She'll make it very difficult." "Yes," I said, "she probably will." A long pause. The neighbor's cat had settled on a patch of concrete in a stripe of late afternoon sun and was apparently completely content with its life, which I envied in that moment. "I'll do it," Daniel said. "I should have done it a long time ago." "Yes," I said again, "you should have." I did not go home that night. I needed to see the conversation with Patricia happen before I moved back into that apartment. Daniel understood that, or at least he accepted it. We agreed he would call me afterward. What I did not know, what I had no reason to suspect, sitting on those front steps in the long evening light, was that the conversation Daniel was going to have with his mother would reveal something that entirely changed the geometry of what I thought I understood. It turned out the barbecue had not been an impulse. It had not been a casual cruelty, a spur-of-the-moment exercise of preference. Patricia had, in fact, been working towards something for a significant period of time, and the driveway was simply the moment she had chosen to make it visible. Daniel found out because he went to his mother's house the next morning, a Friday, with the intention of having the direct conversation we had discussed. What he found instead, or rather, what he found first, before the conversation could begin, was a folder on Patricia's kitchen table. He recognized the name of a real estate agency on the cover. He recognized his name on the first page. He recognized an address, the address of our apartment building, in the text that followed. And he recognized, in that sickening clarity of sudden comprehension, that his mother had at some point obtained information about the lease on our apartment and had been in contact with a real estate agent about its eventual disposition, and had apparently been developing a view about what should happen to the apartment, and by extension to me, that was considerably more developed than no room in the car. He called me from the street outside her house, still holding his phone in both hands, his voice doing something I had not heard it do in years, shaking. "Ellie," he said, "there's something I need to tell you. I'm so sorry. Ellie, I think she's been planning this for a long time." I drove to meet Daniel at a coffee shop 3 blocks from his mother's house, rather than at Patricia's house itself, because I needed a table between me and that woman, and I needed to be in a public space where the volume of any conversation would be naturally constrained. The coffee shop was one of those neighborhood places that has been operating for decades without changing much. Dark wood, mismatched chairs, a chalkboard menu with the same items in slightly different chalk handwriting depending on who opened that morning. It smelled of espresso and something baked with cinnamon, and under other circumstances, I would have found it comforting. That morning, I barely registered it. I sat down across from Daniel, and I looked at the folder he had placed on the table between us, and I understood that whatever I had thought this situation was, it was in fact considerably larger. He pushed the folder toward me without speaking. I opened it carefully, the way you open something you suspect of being a trap, not with reluctance, but with deliberateness, giving each page the attention it required before moving to the next. It was thorough. I will give Patricia that. She had been thorough in a way that spoke to long preparation and genuine intent. There were printouts of apartment listings in our area, comparable units with prices highlighted in yellow marker, organized by neighborhood and date. There were notes in a handwriting I recognized from birthday cards, dense and slightly slanted, with notations about square footage and market timing and lease terms, and a phrase I had to read twice before I understood its meaning and context. When the situation is resolved. Not when Daniel is ready or when they decide to move. When the situation is resolved. As though I were a situation. As though the fact of me and Daniel's life were a temporary administrative complication awaiting resolution. There was a sheet that appeared to be a draft proposal of some kind, headed with Daniel's name, addressing what was described as a transition in living arrangements, referring throughout to the current tenant. Not Ellie, not Daniel's wife, not even my name in passing as a courtesy. The current tenant, like a line item, like a detail to be managed and moved past on the way to whatever outcome Patricia had determined was appropriate. I turned the last page and set it down and looked at Daniel. "When did she make this?" I asked. "I don't know," he said. His hands were wrapped around a coffee cup he had not drunk from. "I found it on the table when I got there this morning. She was in the kitchen. I don't think she meant for me to find it, or maybe she did. I genuinely cannot tell you any more what she means to do and what she doesn't." "This is not something you put together in an afternoon," I said. "The listings are from different dates. The notes are layered. Look, she's written over some of them. This has been in progress for a while." "I know." "How long do you think she has been working on this?" He was quiet for a long moment. Outside the window, the street was doing its ordinary Saturday things. A woman walking a dog, a man unlocking a bicycle, the unhurried rhythm of a neighborhood morning. "I don't know," he said again, "but when I look at this, I think at least several months, maybe longer." "Several months," I repeated, not as a question, just as a way of making it real in the air between us. "Ellie, I didn't know." "I believe you," I said. And I did. I want to be absolutely honest about that because it matters. I believed that Daniel had not known about the folder, had not known about the listings, had not been a conscious participant in his mother's planning. The evidence of his reaction that morning supported that, and I am not someone who disbelieves people in order to make a story simpler. The truth was more complicated than a single villain and a knowing accomplice, and the truth was what I needed to work with. But belief in his ignorance did not make the situation easier. In some ways, it made it harder, because the question was no longer simply what Patricia had been doing. The question was how she had been able to do it, how 3 years of systematic exclusion and planning had unfolded inside a marriage, within arm's reach of a man who considered himself attentive and kind, without him seeing it clearly enough to stop it. That was not a question about Patricia. That was a question about Daniel. And sitting across from him in that coffee shop with the folder between us, I understood that we were going to have to answer it. "I need to go talk to her," I said. He looked up. "Ellie, not you on my behalf, not a message through you. I need to sit across from her and have a direct conversation in which she understands that I have seen this folder and I know what she has been doing, and in which I say clearly the things that need to be said." "It won't go well," he said. "I know that. She has ways of managing conversations. She'll cry, or she'll redirect, or she'll make it about something else." "Let her try," I said, and the steadiness in my own voice surprised me, not because I was performing steadiness, but because I actually felt it, the particular quality of calm that comes not from the absence of feeling, but from the presence of clarity. I knew what I needed to say. I knew how I needed to say it. The folder had, perversely, given me that, a clean, documented understanding of exactly what had been happening, which made it impossible to second-guess myself in the way I had been second-guessing myself for years. "I am done having conversations in which she manages the outcome," I said. "I am going to go to her house, and I am going to sit in her front room, and I am going to say what I need to say, and what she does with it is her business." Daniel looked at me for a long moment, Something in his face shifted. I had seen different versions of that shift over the years, the particular rearrangement that happened when he was moving from his default of accommodation toward something harder and more honest. "I'm coming with you," he said. "Good," I said. "You should be there. But Daniel, this time you don't fill the silence for her. Whatever she says, however long the pause is, you don't rush to smooth it over. You let it sit." "Okay," he said. "I mean it." "I know you mean it," he said. "I'll do it." We finished our coffees, or rather I finished mine and Daniel held his until it was cold, and we drove to Patricia's house in a silence that was not uncomfortable so much as weighted, full of the things we were both organizing internally before we arrived. I looked out the window at the Saturday streets and thought about the green sundress, which I had folded and put in the drawer at Rachel's, and the pasta salad, and the 5 seats in the car, and every smaller version of that gesture that had preceded it over 3 years. I thought about the phrase, "the current tenant," and the yellow highlighted listings and the notes in that familiar slanted handwriting. I thought about what it means to be methodical about someone's removal from a life, and to conduct that methodology quietly enough that the person you share the life with doesn't notice. I thought about what I wanted from the conversation we were about to have, and I was careful and specific with myself about that. I was not going there to win an argument. I was not going there to make Patricia feel bad, or to punish her, or to deliver a speech. I was going there because the alternative, to have seen the folder and not addressed it, to have allowed the situation to continue unremarked, was simply not something I was capable of anymore. I had used up my capacity for unremarking. Patricia answered the door in the composed manner she always answered the door, unhurried, upright, a woman who had arranged herself for whatever was coming. She had known Daniel was returning. She could not have known he would bring me, and I watched the brief recalibration cross her face before the composure closed over it again. She was wearing a cream-colored blouse, and her hair was set the way it always was, and she smelled of the particular lavender fragrance she wore, and she looked at me with an expression that was carefully, precisely neutral. "Come in," she said, as though this were any other Saturday. We sat in her front room. The room was, as it always was, maintained with the specific pride of someone for whom domestic order is a form of self-presentation. The photographs on the mantel, Daniel at various ages, the family at various gatherings. I recognized the most recent one, a backyard, a table laden with food, people laughing in the summer light. Yesterday. I did not look at it for long. I set the folder on the coffee table between us. I set it down squarely, deliberately, and I left my hand flat on top of it for just a moment before I moved it back to my lap. A gesture that was not theatrical, but precise, a way of saying, "This is what we are here about." Patricia looked at the folder. She looked at Daniel. She looked at me. Her expression was composed in the manner of someone with long and practiced composure. But I had been studying Patricia for 3 years, and I saw, beneath the surface, the very slight shift of someone who understands that the situation has changed. "I'd like to understand what this is," I said. "That's private," she said. Her voice held the note of mild reproach she used when she felt that boundaries had been crossed. "You shouldn't be going through my things, Ellie." "I found it on your kitchen table," Daniel said. "Daniel, I think—" "Mom." His voice was different. I had heard him speak to her in many registers over the years, but not this one, stripped of the habitual softening, the automatic accommodation. "I found it on the table. I have read it. Ellie has read it. We are going to talk about what it means." A pause. Patricia adjusted her posture almost imperceptibly. "I was doing some research," she said. "I was looking into options. For the future. There is nothing wrong with planning." "You researched the lease on our apartment?" I said. "I was trying to be helpful. Daniel works very hard, and the financial burdens of—" "You wrote about the current tenant," I said. "That is the phrase you used several times throughout this document. Not my name, not Daniel's wife, the current tenant, as though I were a stranger subletting a room. The silence after that sentence had texture. Patricia's hands folded in her lap did not move. The clock on the mantel ticked steadily. Daniel sat beside me without moving, without filling the space with something softer. And the fact of that, his stillness, his refusal to rescue the moment for her, was something I would think about later with a complicated gratitude. That was simply shorthand, Patricia said. It wasn't meant to... Patricia. I said her name quietly, without sharpness, because sharpness would have given her something to deflect against. I want to say something, and I need you to actually hear it rather than find a way around it. Can you do that? She looked at me. For the first time in 3 years, I felt that she was actually looking at me rather than at the space I occupied in relation to her son. Go ahead, she said. I believe that you love Daniel, I said. Genuinely. I have never doubted that you love him and that your actions come from a place of real attachment to him. I want you to know that I understand that because I think it matters. I paused. What I also need you to understand is that this, I touched the folder briefly, is not an act of love toward Daniel. It is an act of control. And it is not the first one. It is simply the most documented one. She drew a breath. I continued before she could use it. On Thursday, you told me there was no room in the car, in front of your other son, his wife, and their children. That is not ambiguous. That is not a misunderstanding. That is a public statement that I do not belong in your family. And now I find that while that was happening, while you were making that statement, you had been building, in private, a practical case for removing me from the life I share with your son. I looked at her steadily. I need to ask you a direct question. What is it that you believe gives you the right to make that determination? The room was very quiet. The lavender smell, the ticking clock, the photographs on the mantel, the folder on the table. Patricia was very still. She looked at Daniel. Daniel looked back at her. He did not look away. He did not say, "Mom, let's try to," or "I think what Ellie means is," or any of the dozens of gentle reframings I had watched him deploy over the years to keep the temperature down and the surface smooth. He looked at his mother, and he waited. And his waiting was the most important thing he had done in a very long time. "I love my son," she said finally. Her voice, for the first time, had something underneath the composure. Not quite vulnerability, but the precursor to it, a slight unevenness of surface. "I know you do," I said, "but love is not a license. Loving someone does not give you the right to override their choices, or to work against their partner, or to plan for the removal of the person they have chosen to build a life with. That is not love in action. That is something else." "I only ever wanted—" "Patricia," I said her name again, gently, firmly. "I know what you wanted. You wanted things to be a certain way, and I didn't fit the shape of that. I understand. I might even, in another version of events, have sympathy for how difficult it is to accept that your son's life has its own shape, independent of yours. But understanding your motivation does not mean I will accept its consequences. Not anymore." She was silent. Daniel said then, with a clarity and a directness that I will not diminish by suggesting it was perfect or that it came easily, because I know it did not come easily, the thing he should have said at many earlier points and had not. "Mom, I need you to hear this from me clearly. What Ellie is describing, the folder, Thursday, all of it going back further than Thursday, it stops. I am choosing my marriage. I am choosing Ellie. That is not a negotiation, and it is not something I am saying to hurt you. It is simply what is true, and I need it to be the basis of everything that comes after this conversation." Patricia looked at her son for a long moment. The composed expression held, but it held differently now. Not like a wall, but like a person standing very straight while something inside them reorganizes itself. She did not cry. I had half expected the tears that she deployed in other conversations, the grief that functioned as a pressure tactic, and she did not produce them. What happened instead was a kind of stillness, a recognition, I think, that the calculation she had been running for years had reached a point where it would cost more to continue than to stop. "I hear you," she said, to Daniel, not to me. "Patricia," I said, and she looked at me, and I held that look steadily. "I want us to be able to be in the same room without this between us. I don't know if we'll ever be close, and I've stopped needing us to be, but I need it to be honest. I can work with honest." She held my gaze for a moment longer than was comfortable for either of us, and then she nodded, not effusively, not warmly, but genuinely, the small, tight nod of someone who has heard something and accepted that it is real. We left shortly afterward. Daniel walked close beside me down the front path to the car, and when we reached it, he stopped and put both arms around me in the middle of the quiet street, and I let him, and we stood there for a moment with the late morning around us, and neither of us said anything, because there wasn't a right thing to say, only the reality of the moment, which was sufficient. In the car on the way back, Daniel said, "I'm sorry it took this long." "I know," I said. I'm actually sorry. Not as an apology to manage the situation. Actually sorry." I looked at him. "I know the difference," I said. "That's why I'm still here." We drove in silence for a while. The streets were ordinary, full of their ordinary Saturday business, indifferent to the fact that inside a very small car, a marriage was in the process of deciding what it was. I watched the neighborhoods pass and thought about the folder, which Daniel had taken back, and which I assumed he had dealt with, or would deal with, and which I did not need to hold on to as evidence because the evidence was not the point. The point was the conversation that had just happened, and whether it would hold. It held, imperfectly, gradually, with the specific difficulty of things that hold because people choose to make them hold, rather than because they are naturally easy. Daniel went to therapy. We had long conversations in the evenings, the kind that are uncomfortable not because they are hostile, but because they require a level of honesty that is genuinely effortful, about patterns and choices, and what it means in practice to be someone's partner, rather than the person standing between them and their family of origin. Patricia remained who she was because people rarely transform in any meaningful way from a single sitting room conversation. But she was who she was at a different distance, and the specific behaviors, the calculated exclusions, the documentation, the working toward, stopped. Or at least, if they continued in a privacy so absolute that they no longer had any effect on my actual life, which amounted to the same thing. My friend Donna called me a few weeks later. "You seem different," she said. "What changed?" "I stopped waiting for permission," I said. "Permission to what?" "To take up the space I was already in." She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Good. It was uncomfortable watching you make yourself smaller." I had not known I had been making myself smaller. That is still the thing that catches me when I think about it, the invisibility of incremental adjustment, the way you can lose significant amounts of yourself in small enough portions that the loss is never individually alarming. I had been doing it for 3 years, trimming expectations, revising standards, accommodating the unacceptable by redefining it as merely uncomfortable, and calling the whole enterprise patience, when what it actually was, in aggregate, was a slow erosion of the person I had been before I had started needing to be careful. I moved back into the apartment the weekend after the conversation at Patricia's house. I carried my suitcases back up the stairs that I had carried them down, the same stairs, the same weight, a different direction. I unpacked methodically, hanging clothes back in the closet, returning items to their places on the bathroom shelves, putting the photographs back on the dresser. The one of my sister at the lake and the one of my parents at their anniversary, and also, this time, the ones of Daniel and me, the one from our wedding where we are both laughing at something that happened just off frame, The one from a trip we took before we were married, when everything still felt like discovery. I put them back. That was a choice, too. I took the pasta salad out of the refrigerator where it had been sitting through the entire week of events, still sealed, still good. I ate it standing at the kitchen counter in the afternoon light, with the oak trees full and green outside the window and the sounds of the street coming up in the warm air. And I thought about the driveway and the car and the 5 seats and Patricia's flat, certain voice saying, "No room." And I thought about what had come after. All of it. The packing and Rachel's kitchen and Donna's phone call and the coffee shop and the sitting room and Daniel's arms around me in the street. And I thought, that is the cost of the seat I have now. It was a real cost. It had bought a real thing. I ate the pasta salad and watched the light move and did not pretend that either of those facts canceled the other. The apartment smelled of wood polish and whatever was growing on the windowsill, and the particular accumulated warmth of a home that has been lived in honestly. The light came through the wide windows the way it always had. The high ceilings held the morning the way they always had. I was standing in my kitchen, in my home, in my life, with my name on the lease and my photographs on the dresser, and my marriage in the process of becoming something more truthful than it had been. Nobody had made room for me. I had made it myself. That, I had come to understand, was always how it was going to have to be. And that understanding, hard as it had been to arrive at, was the only version of it I would have trusted.